Let's talk appraisal gaps. So sometimes, especially if you are in a competitive area, your buyer will offer an appraisal gap to make their offer more appealing to you. But it's really important to understand what that appraisal gap is and how that impacts you as a seller. So an appraisal gap means that if a buyer offers $500,000 for your home and you are under contract for $500,000 and their appraisal comes back at $480,000, but they offered you a full appraisal gap, meaning I'm going to pay $500,000 whether it appraises or not. That's all it means for you, is that you get $500,000 whether it appraises or not. Here's the thing though. One, I don't like uncapped appraisal gaps. I think they're incredibly risky and I think they set everybody up for failure. So me personally, I recommend my clients pick a number that they're really, really happy with and cap it so that we know that the buyer has comprehended. Like this is just what it is, right? Because most buyers don't have uncapped amounts of money in their bank account. If it's off by 60,000 and they can't do 60,000 extra, you're now in a tough situation and so are they, and we were not set up for success. So I definitely don't like accepting an uncapped appraisal gap, and I don't think it's in your best interest as a seller. However, if your buyer offers you a $500,000 for your home and the home appraises for $480,000, but they offered you an appraisal gap up to $490,000, that means that you get the $490,000. Now, a common question that I get asked is, what if it appraises higher than $500,000? First of all, if there's a situation where there's an appraisal gap involved, I can almost guarantee you the home is not going to overappraise. I've not seen that happen. Number two, we actually don't find out on the sell side unless it underappraises and the appraisal gap doesn't cover. We have no reason to even know about it because that appraisal report belongs to the buyer and the lender. So what's important to understand is if a buyer offers you an appraisal gap, their loan is not going to cover the full purchase price of the home if the home doesn't appraise. So the loan will only cover the appraised amount. Back to our example, you're under contract for $500,000, your home appraised for $480,000, your buyer offered you a full appraisal gap. That means they have to bring their down payment and their closing costs on a $480,000 loan to closing. It also means they now have to bring an extra $20,000 to closing. And so I, again, recommend capping an appraisal gap 100%. I think it's important to cap them. I also recommend trying to make the earnest money match the appraisal gap. So for instance, since we don't want an uncapped appraisal gap, let's just say your buyer offers you an appraisal gap of $20,000, meaning I will pay up to this price if the home appraises, and if the home doesn't appraise, I will pay the appraised price plus $20,000. I want $20,000 in earnest money. Even though that is a significantly larger amount of earnest money than what's normal, that protects you as the seller and makes sure that they have that money on the line. They can't just cancel because it went the way that they said they were going to be willing to do it. So for example, the home doesn't appraise, rather than coming up with that extra $20,000, which it would be illegal for them to cancel anyway, but rather than coming up with that $20,000, they then want to cancel, which leaves you in a bind when the whole reason you accepted their offer was because of the appraisal gap. So instead of putting you in a position where that can happen, if we're accepting a $20,000 appraisal gap, I really want that buyer to give $20,000 in earnest money, because then even if the home doesn't appraise by $20,000, they have $20,000 on the line regardless. And that's just one way that we kind of build in to protect you, because again, those things can get risky. They increase chances of buyer's remorse and make things complicated for both you and the buyer. And so we want to make sure that we've asked the right questions. Again, this is a place where your realtor's communication is going to be absolutely critical. And so because I know this doesn't mean that the other agent does. And just because the other agent might know this doesn't mean that they had a thorough enough conversation and that their client fully understands what this means. And so while I don't get direct access to the buyer to have that conversation with them, I do get direct access to the realtor, and I do get direct access to their loan officer. And we can also verify through the attorneys. I don't get to communicate with their attorney, but your attorney does. And so we like to double check and triple check and make sure that everybody actually understands what it means and that we've built in something to protect you, to make sure we're not wasting our time accepting this offer. But appraisal gaps can be a great way, again, to increase the value of your homes in your neighborhood, because once your home sells, like your home appraised for $480 but closed at $500,000, well, you just raise the value of every one of your neighbors' homes. And so they owe you a thank you card. But I know that was a lot of information, so feel free to reach out if you have any questions.